afternoon, Tim McClure. As he mentioned, I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Northwest ISD, fastest growing school district in North Texas, in the top 10. We're hovering around top 6 right now for the state. What that means is we're about 31,000 students, so quite a bit less than some of the other presenters you've heard today, from Boston, from Dallas, from San Antonio, Northside. Those are big districts. We're going to catch up with them someday. We will be close to 100,000 students when we're all said and done. We've got that much room to grow. We've grown about 25,000 students just in the last 2 decades. We do that at a pace of about 1,200 to 1,300 students annually, except for since COVID. Since COVID, we've upped to about 2,000 to 2,200 students annually. So a lot to keep up with in our district. Before I get started, I just want to kind of go back and set the stage for kind of one of those building blocks that seeing the demographics, age demographics in this group, I think y'all will all relate to. But when I was growing up, one of those building blocks of literature for me, and hopefully for the rest of y'all, were these books. Everybody remember these books? Probably had them in the library, maybe even at your house. Saw them everywhere. What were the names of these books? What's that? Dick and Jane, that's right, Dick and Jane. We see Dick and Jane, we work Dick and Jane, go, go, go. Lots of different series of books there, but Dick and Jane we never saw them grow up. And so I said, let me think about what would happen if Dick and Jane grew up and we were going to be voters in my district. And so we'll fast forward to them in their adult years. It looks like Jane kind of has her act together. She looks like a confident voter there. Unfortunately, Dick on the other side looks like an uninformed, slightly confused voter. And so the point of this is to say this is what's going to happen at the end of the presentation. So I'm kind of giving you the end before we get there. Is everything that we do to go out for a bond election needs to lead to the confident voter. And so I want to talk about that, including or staying with that same thing of kind of fundamental building blocks when I was a child. We'll go on and we'll talk about the ABCs of passing a bond with those nice wooden blocks that we used to play with as a kid as well. The A, of course, is the aggregate. So we want to make sure we aggregate all the details that go into a bond program. That can be a lot of stuff depending on your district. For us as a fast growth district, it's a lot of new builds. It's also taking care of what we got. So taking care of the old, keeping up with buses, technology, keeping up with the infrastructure. So a lot of different pieces there. For your district, it may be a little bit different. The B of that is, of course, the budget. You got to understand what that budget impact is for that bond election as you're aggregating all those details and making that into a whole program for your community. And then the last one, of course, is communicate. And so how do you communicate that out to your constituents, to your voters, so they can be that informed voter? So let's start with aggregate. I'm just going to throw some images up here, and I'll talk through them as they kind of populate. And so I won't hit each and every one, but mostly I want to talk through the process of establishing a district standard, making sure you're doing those facility assessments if you're looking at aging districts, also making sure you're gathering that community group. Ours is called Long Range Planning Committee, so we bring them on board. For us, we're looking at home ranking reports. If you're a fast growth district, that's going to be a component. That's going to be one of those pieces of that aggregate that you're putting together. We're also looking at our 10-year growth of our campuses to see which campuses are going to fill, so we know where to purchase land, know what that needs to do to relieve those campuses. We're looking at timelines. We're looking at budgetary costs. We're looking at facility condition assessments, right? We talked about those a little bit earlier, making sure you're analyzing what components may need to be upgraded in some of your aging campuses. And all this, buses, transportation, all those type of things, all this in a method and manner so that your committee is taking in all that information. Our committee meets usually about 8 times. That lasts about every 2 weeks, so it lasts about 4 months before they get to a recommendation to the board. Another important piece of that, especially for us, like fast growth district, or if you're a district that you're going to pass multiple bonds in the next decade or so, or forthcoming, is to keep that committee engaged. So even though the committee may be doing some bond work specifically for a recommendation to the board, we've passed one in May of 23. We still keep that committee engaged twice a year. We bring them in for a fall update and a spring update so that they can see the fruits of their labor. They can see the things that they are been worked towards and how those are being put out into the community. I show this last one, the survey piece there, to say we take all this data, and while the committee's evaluating all that data and coming up to the point of understanding what may be the pieces that comprise the bond they're going to recommend, We also go out to the community with a community survey, and this isn't actually a very targeted survey. This is one of those political type surveys that you pay for. This isn't Google survey, this isn't SurveyMonkey, right? This is something that's very, very specific, and you can see this is kind of just a very brief shot that I'll talk about, but the reason we do that is because they're very skilled in asking kind of an initial ballot. Like if the board brought a bond to you, I think our example up there is $275 million to you tomorrow, how would you vote? Straight off the bat. And then they take the time to go through a series of questions. That can be a wide range of 15 to 20 to 30 questions, depending on the size of your bond. And they evaluate each one of those questions and those responses, and then at the end, they ask that same person, okay, now knowing everything we've talked to you about, now that you're informed, right, going back to Jane, now that you're an informed, confident person about the information, how would you respond now if the board pushed out a bond? And you can see in this example, these are true, this is taken straight from our survey, not our last survey before last, but 50% right off the bat was a yes. Okay, that's great. I'll take that into a ballot. That sounds pretty good. But 68% is a lot better once we've informed them. The nice thing about that is because we take some demographic data at the first of those surveys, we ask them, if they're a parent, or if they're a non-parent, what's their age, all those type of things. We take some of that. We can come out with some targeting messages. So we know what will respond to certain user groups in certain areas of our community, what that messaging is that they're going to pick up on and actually sway them a little bit to a more positive nature of understanding what we're asking for. So there's the aggregate. A lot of pieces, a lot of stuff goes into that, and we just really hope that if you're doing that, you're working to kind of customize that to your community, to your district, and using that committee to get through that process. The next piece is the budget. And the budget has several components as well. First and foremost, and I probably don't have to explain much of this to this group, but you got to understand what the budget means. And a lot of times, our communities, or people that are out there voting, they don't understand what the budget means. They just see a big number and they go, there's no, man, my gosh, how can you of course you can build a school for that amount. I can build a house for this amount, right? And they want to do that cost comparison piece. You got to understand what all goes into that, the soft costs, the contingencies. You got to understand that technology's in there, furniture may be in there. You may have site situations that are a part of that. For us in our district, we're a community that's full of old ranch and rural farming land. And so as we start to build, we're having to bring in utilities. So we have a lot of off-site utility costs that go into our bond elections for our sites, because we're not just landing it on a site that there happens to be sewer, water, electricity, and IT needs right there at that corner. We're landing in the middle of a farm where there was nothing before. So they have to understand all that, and then they have to understand you got to project when you think you're going to build it and escalate that to the best of your knowledge, right? Is your crystal ball working well? Mine wasn't too good the last few years, right? We're still adjusting to that. But you got to escalate to when you think you're going to bid that project and know what those costs may be at that point. That may be 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line. Next, we ask our community or our committee to go through a prioritization. We actually remove the budgetary numbers during that prioritization. We don't want that to be an influence on their first pass. We want them to actually take those on merit. What is best for the kid? What is best for the value of the school district? And look at those projects and everything that we've identified, whether it was a stadium or it was new buses or it was new technology. Go through that list without the budget first. Let them prioritize it and then come back and add that budgetary component so that they can then take another shot at it. But we like really getting the first feel for what they want to see in that community pushed forward as a recommendation without that budget component to begin with. Lastly is the piece that you got to understand what's the effect going to have on those community members in their home. In Texas, of course, we have an INS, interest and sinking tax, that makes up the tax rate to pay for bonds. So how does that going to influence their bottom dollar? Something interesting has happened in Texas in the last, I guess it's been about 4 years now. The state mandates that, wonderfully, God bless them, on the ballot for school elections, the last sentence has to say this is a property tax increase. Yeah, absolutely by law has to say this is a property tax increase. Now, you can see on this one, we were 1/10 of a penny. Now, we could have been nothing. Our property value is growing a whole lot. We put enough in there to make sure it was 1/10 of a penny, so we aligned with that language. Now, 1/10 of a penny is pretty small. You can see for average home in our district is about $450,000, so about $4 annually. But we could have asked for less, and it would have been a 0 tax rate increase, but we didn't want to battle that ballot language. We wanted to align with the ballot language, so we actually asked our committee, hey, keep pushing, get a little bit more in there, because if we can actually say it's something, even a tenth of a penny, then we align with the ballot language. And so it's a little bit of struggle in Texas that we're having to deal with now. Lastly, because of COVID and because of all the challenges, this time around we did something we've never done before. We asked 3 of our general contractor partners that have done work for the district for years to come and sit down and do a panel for us and sit down and let our community ask them questions about how they're dealing with cost escalation. And so that was a really positive outcome. They played nice. We didn't get into a construction battle up on stage or anything like that. They played nice and they answered the questions, but that way, the community hears it from me all the time, but to hear it from the experts that's actually going to bid these jobs and award these jobs, that was a really important piece. Take all that, you go back and you get into the actual processing of what those projects are, maybe how you're going to divide that out. There's the categories we kind of put stuff in, and then what that recommendation is that goes to the board. So we ask our committee to take that recommendation to the board. We feel that that's really important. It's the product of their work. Yeah, it's easy for staff to get up and do that. We support them. We'll build the presentation with them. I'm there as a safety net if the board comes at them with something really crazy or some, left field question. Probably none of your boards do that, but every now and then we have a board member that goes off the deep end. But we do ask our committee to come and put that together, and usually it's about 3 or 4, sometimes 5, that will step up and be happy to present those slides and the recommendation to the board. Last piece is communicate. And of course, communication is key in any conversation. We do a lot of different things here. I'll start early on. In Texas, once the board makes a call, we have electioneering laws that says we cannot advocate for a bond. It may be similar in where you're from, but we cannot actually go out and positively say, it's kind of oxymoronic, right? If we actually voted, if our board voted 7-0 to go for a bond election, well, they're for the bond election, but you can't actually say you're for the bond election. So we start the communication process with our staff before the board gets the recommendation. We want to make sure we can talk freely with our staff and say, hey, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's the consequences if this fell. Here's why we need your support on this. And make sure our staff understands that. We're safe to do that in that zone because the board hadn't called anything yet. So we can sit down with our staff. We do that at staff meetings. Our cabinet goes around. We each take some campuses and we go around and we meet with those staff. Say, hey, here's what's coming up. We don't know what's going to be in it yet. The committee's still doing the work, but we really need you to focus on what this means. It also gives us opportunity to educate them on what they can and can't say while they're on the clock with the district about the state law. So twofold there. 1, we get to talk candidly, and 2, we get to say, hey, when this does happen, make sure when you're on your personal time, your dime, you can say whatever you want. But when you're at school, you can't be sending out blasts about go vote for the bond or anything like that. We also obviously send out communication. There's Facebook Live image of me up there on Facebook Live. That's a great way to reach our community. We have the Long Range Planning Committee website and the bond website so that our community can go out and see all the details that went into this process. Our committee will usually form a political action committee because they can advocate for the bond. So many of our committee members are actually coming off that committee and going out and doing that work on the side, kind of paralleling what the district messaging is. The other thing I think is important to talk about in communication is timing. For timing, it's in the state of Texas, board has to call a bond election 72 days before the election date. So you've just done 3 or 4 months of worth of work. For our committee, we're about 80 people on this committee. They're all gung-ho. They get the board to approve it and go out and recommend it. And guess what they want to do? They want to go out and tell the world. But it's 72 days. It's almost 2.5 months before the election date comes. So you have to kind of pull the reins back on them a little bit. Say, wait a minute, we need to pause for a minute. If you peak too soon, the message, it gets dull on people, right? You want to peak at the right time, going right into that early election. So make sure your timing on when you're going out for those communications. I know it's going to feel like, wait a minute, why aren't we telling everybody? We tell everybody, we say, hey, the board did it, but we don't really start really amping up the communication until we get about a month out, and especially leading right into that early election. So why do we do all this? Well, we want to constantly cultivate a culture of voting. It's a very difficult process for school districts because mostly our elected officials, our politicians, our legislators, they know school districts have a voice. In fact, a lot of times school districts will storm the Capitol, right, and speak as one voice on a certain topic, and that's great. But what politicians don't tell you that they know is we don't go vote as an education community. And that's not just in Texas, that's around the country. And so we're constantly pushing this for our district, not just when we have something on the ballot, every time around. This last November, we didn't have anything on the ballot, but we're constantly reminding those families that are moving to our community to update their registration. If they're moving from out of state, to get registered to vote, to make sure that they're having that voice. We're emphasizing that with our staff. We want to make sure that we're creating a constant culture of voting, because we don't want to be that passive participant, right? We definitely do not want to be a passive participant in the process. We don't want to be, well, let's stay on the positive. We want to be like Jane, right? We want to be like Jane and be a confident voter. And maybe Jane actually had some influence in this process. Maybe Jane actually was on the committee or on the political action committee, and maybe she actually helped influence Dick to become a confident voter. And so hopefully that's the end of the process. Is hopefully you're educating your community, you're getting buy-in, you're communicating, so that when they get to the polls, they know exactly what they're voting for and they feel confident about it. I'll end on the last slide just to give you some data if you want it. There's our websites that we operate outside of the district website. You can certainly get to them through our district website. But we maintain 3 websites, and we do those constantly. We have the NISD TX LRPC, Long Range Planning Committee website. That stuff is archived, so if you go now, you'll see what was prepped for the 2023 bond, but you can also go into the archive and see what we've done in the past. Every slide, every meeting minute, every presentation, all that is in there, exactly what the committee work did. We maintain a bond website so that you can see the work that's actively going on when we're passing a bond. So you can see voter information, you can see what all was in the bond program. Lots of details there. Of course, right now it says thank you voters, but all the details are still there. And again, we archive previous bonds, so you can go back and look at those as well. And then we maintain an NISD TX construction website so that you can follow along with what the bond dollars are doing. And so we try to update that monthly on our active sites. If a project has opened, that goes again into an archive section, so you can always go back and look at that. So that's it. Thank you for your attention today. I will say probably one of the best things about this presentation is you only have one more presentation until happy hour, right? So we're going to get through this together. So thank you, and I'll take any questions if there are any. I got 2 minutes left.
So on your long-range planning committee, do you ever have any detractors? Anybody who's you have to control and pull back into?
We do, and actually we want those. We don't want a whole room full of them, right? But we certainly want 1 or 2. We ask for that committee to be developed from our leadership across the district. So we ask for our principals and our leadership at our campuses to recommend people. We'll ask our board to recommend people, executive cabinet to recommend people. And we want people, we want people that aren't even connected to the district. We want community leaders and things like that. But I will say, I've been doing this for Northwest ISD for a long time. I was there as an architect doing it, as a vendor. I rolled away from that architecture firm. I was a parent there, and I actually led the PAC. I was the chair of the PAC one year, and now I'm a staffer. So I've kind of seen all 3 elements throughout that process and other bonds I've done for other districts in my professional career. Most of the time, if we've had a distractor on there, by the time they see the light, they may not still agree with everything, but they at least understand the concept. So I think it's always healthy to have 1 or 2 of those voices, 3 or 4, depending on the size of your committee, in there to be able to give you that opposition's view so that you can attack it.
So I noticed you have multiple propositions there.
Yes, sir.
What sort of considerations or strategies are you thinking about when you're breaking that bond up into multiple propositions?
That's a great question, and many moons ago, that would be a question that we would attack as a school district system and decide on that. The state, again, in addition to the lovely sentence about this is a tax increase, has mandated certain things have to be in a separate prop. So anything that's like not a school building, like a stadium, an auditorium, a performing arts center, those things have to be broken out. Technology has to be broken out. So some of those things are impacted on us. I will say our district back in 2005, before those laws were in place, went for a bond, and we went for a new stadium. It passed, but we pulled the stadium out. We certainly didn't want anything that was going to be a distractor to take away from the general bond and could potentially cause failure for that general bond. And we found that out through the community survey we did. we saw that there was a contingency against that stadium that could have failed the more important work. Not saying that football and cheer and band and all those things aren't important, but the more important work of the classroom that needed to happen, we saw that in the survey. So that's another good reason to do those surveys that are targeted.
Let's hear it for Mr. McClure.
Thank you.